There's a truth that I have found in the phrase, only hurting people hurt people. And it really directed me in some interesting paths as far as identifying certain people that I was drawn to or certain people I allowed into my life. I had a lot of people in the past who were hurting, and unfortunately I wasn't able to process their hurt. And when I had to start distancing myself because I couldn't handle it once the PNES started, they didn't like that. They felt attacked. They didn't like the thought that I had to separate myself from them because they were in pain and not handling their pain. It's not something that I wanted to be able or not be able to do. I wanted to be able to process and be there for people who were hurting. But I was in so much pain myself from all the years of collecting emotions and bottling that I wasn't effective in what I wanted to be able to do. So I had to cut certain elements out of my life or pull back. And people feel attacked sometimes, and I found the truth that weaknesses are exploited. There are people who will try to trigger seizures, and that's just the ugly truth of it. Maybe if you're watching this, maybe you can identify somebody in your life who you think, maybe just in the back of your mind, and you don't have to say it. I recommend that you don't say it. But maybe you can identify someone who you think is intentionally trying to cause you to have a seizure. And if you think about it this way, they have the power when they're able to cause us to have a seizure, when they're able to put us in the situation where we are so repressed and backed into a corner and we have nowhere to go and our body shuts down. They have full control because not only have they put us in a vulnerable situation, we've put ourselves in that situation. Once we recognize those people, we're no longer victims of them. If we don't do anything about it, we become their volunteers. That made a big impact in me when I recognized that there was a trend in certain relationships, certain people, and then I was able to see a certain characteristic in people, and be able to distance myself before putting myself in a danger zone. The problem isn't just that we're vulnerable to them up until that point where we have a seizure, or where we're at the point where we have to distance ourselves from everything in order to diffuse the trigger. But after the fact, if we're unsuccessful in diffusing the seizure, now we're even more vulnerable. Because I can tell you from my personal experience, and pretty much anybody who I've seen or heard who has this, after the fact, it's just such an emotional hangover, essentially. I mean, you're just filled with all this sorrow and vulnerability and not good feelings. And so now you're even more vulnerable to this person or people or group because they have the ability at that point to manipulate the situation and try to be there for you, and to the point where you're so grateful that somebody's there that you forget that they're going to let up to that. Having them in your life led up to that seizure. It's really important to recognize that there are people who, not because they're malicious, not because they're evil people, just because that there's something within them that feels intimidated or scared fear is a huge, huge component that leads to people needing to take a power role, to feel empowered in an argument, to feel like they have the upper hand, because maybe in life they never had the upper hand, and now they're gravitating towards you, and they think that they're going to be able to control you. And unfortunately, when you allow people like that to stay in your life, you are allowing them to control you. I allowed people to control me, and I didn't know it at the time. I didn't know it until I had to create a bubble around myself for the better part of 6 months so that I could heal and just see what was happening in my life, why things were happening, investigate. It wasn't a want. I didn't want to create this bubble. I had to create this bubble. But because I had to, I was able to really look at the nitty-gritty of it, really identify the people who demonstrated what I needed in order to feel loved, and people who maybe gave more negative elements, added more negativity to my life than positivity. And even if it's, 20/80, that might be 20% too much. And we are vulnerable. We are very vulnerable. So, if you can, and even if you can't, try. Try to eliminate those people. Try to eliminate those places that are triggers, that have power over you. Don't